Hi, I'm Bombalina. Last Thanksgiving Eve, my parents kicked me out, calling me a burden, after years of paying every bill they had. But that wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal was the lies they whispered behind closed doors, lies that drained my savings, stole my name, and crushed every ounce of trust I had left. What really happened to the girl who gave everything, and still wasn't enough? Thanksgiving Eve smelled like burnt ham and desperation the moment I stepped into the house. My hands were still stiff from the cold after my long shift, keys jangling loosely in my numb fingers. The living room looked the same, flickering old Christmas lights strung half-heartedly over the mantel, the scent of something burnt wafting from the kitchen. But the air was different. It was heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves knew what was about to happen. Victor stood by the doorway, arms crossed, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey hanging from his hand. Lenora sat silently on the worn couch, staring blankly at the muted television, the flashing images casting long shadows across her tired face. Devlin, my younger brother, lingered near the stairs, pretending to be engrossed in his phone, but his wide, darting eyes told another story. Before I could even put down my purse, Victor's voice, sharp as shattered glass, cut through the room. "You're a burden, Bambalina. You need to leave. Tonight." For a second, I thought maybe I had misheard him. Maybe the exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But no. Lenora didn't look up. She didn't flinch. She just sat there, hands clenched together, as if she had already made peace with this cruelty long before I walked in. I stood frozen, the cold from outside still clinging to my coat, now seeping deeper into my bones. My throat tightened, but I didn't let a single tear fall. Crying would give them something to mock, something to feed on. "You're serious," I said, my voice steady, almost detached. Victor sneered, taking a sloppy sip from the bottle. "Dead serious. You think you're doing us a favor paying a few bills? Acting like you're some savior? Please, you've overstayed your welcome. Time for you to stand on your own 2 feet." I wanted to laugh in his face. Stand on my own 2 feet? I had been carrying this damn family for years, paying the electric, the water, even putting gas in their ancient car when no one else had 2 nickels to rub together. But now, tonight of all nights, I was the problem. Devlin shifted nervously, opening his mouth like he wanted to say something, anything, but Lenora's sharp shake of the head silenced him. My heart broke a little seeing him wilt under her gaze. Without a word, I turned on my heel and climbed the stairs. My room, always a little too cold, a little too small, greeted me with its usual indifference. I moved mechanically, grabbing my suitcase, shoving clothes and important papers into it. I snatched my laptop, my charger, my birth certificate, the essentials for starting over. Sitting on the bed, laptop balanced on my knees, I logged into every utility account tied to this house. One by one, electricity, water, gas, internet. I removed my payment information. Click, confirm, click, confirm. It felt surgical, clean. As I was zipping my suitcase, there was a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find Devlin, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he held out a torn piece of paper. His voice cracked as he whispered, "They said, if you leave, you'll destroy this family." I stared at the note, the messy handwriting unmistakably Victor's. It wasn't a plea. It was a guilt trip wrapped in an ultimatum. I folded the paper neatly and tucked it into my coat pocket without reading it again. I knelt down to Devlin's eye level and rested a hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me," I said softly but firmly. "You are not their tool. You're not responsible for their choices. Understand?" He nodded quickly, blinking back tears. I ruffled his hair lightly, a final act of silent rebellion, and stood up. Dragging my suitcase behind me, I descended the stairs. Victor sat smirking at the bottom, as if daring me to say something, to beg. Lenora still wouldn't look at me. I walked past them without a word, the wheels of my suitcase bumping against the cracked linoleum. Victor's final jab followed me out the door. "Good luck out there, princess. Let's see how far you get without us." I didn't dignify it with a response. I stepped out into the biting night air, my breath fogging instantly. The driveway was slick with frost, the old streetlights buzzing faintly above. I loaded my suitcase into my battered sedan, the trunk creaking under the weight of it all. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I allowed myself one last glance at the house. The windows were dark, except for the faint glow of the TV. No one stood at the door to stop me. No one called my name. Fine. Let it be that way. I pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching against the frozen gravel. The farther I drove, the lighter I felt, as if every mile put more distance between me and the years of thankless sacrifice I had foolishly labeled as love. The night swallowed my old life whole, but I wasn't ready to drown with it. I didn't remember much of the drive to Yvette's place, just the blur of dark frozen streets and the hollow sound of the heater struggling against the cold. My hands were stiff on the steering wheel, and my mind buzzed with 1,000 unfinished thoughts. By the time I pulled into the cracked parking lot outside her apartment complex, it was well past midnight. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a pale, sickly glow. Yvette answered the door in sweatpants and a worn college hoodie, her brown hair pulled into a messy bun. She didn't say much, just stepped aside and opened her arms. No judgment, no questions, just a solid, grounding hug that lasted longer than I realized I needed. "Stay as long as you need," she murmured. Inside, her apartment was small, but warm, cluttered in a cozy kind of way. A lone candle burned on the coffee table, filling the room with the scent of vanilla. I dropped my suitcase by the door, kicked off my shoes, and without wasting a second, pulled my laptop from my bag. The world outside could wait. Tonight, I had work to finish. I sat at her small kitchen table while Yvette disappeared into her bedroom to give me space. I opened the necessary tabs, one by one: electricity, water, gas, internet, Amazon Prime, Netflix, the entire infrastructure I had been quietly financing for years. With every click of remove payment method, a different kind of shackle fell away. Click, cancel, confirm. Done. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't second-guessing. I moved methodically, cutting each tie with the same precision someone might use to disarm a bomb. In a way, that's exactly what I was doing. Dismantling the weapon that had been pointed at me my entire adult life. I had supported them in silence for too long, I whispered under my breath. Now, I'm ending it. Silently. By the time I closed my laptop, the clock on the wall blinked 2:07 a.m. I leaned back, feeling the full weight of exhaustion catch up to me all at once. But under the fatigue, there was something else humming in my veins. Relief. It didn't last long. At 6:13 a.m., my phone buzzed violently on the nightstand next to Yvette's couch where I had crashed. Groggy, I grabbed it, blinking at the sudden flood of notifications, missed calls, voicemails, text messages. The first voicemail was Victor's voice, slurred with rage. "You selfish brat! The power's out! The internet's dead! What did you do? After everything we gave you, you just walk out? You think you're better than us?" Delete. The second voicemail came from Lenora, her tone a frantic whisper. "Bombalina, please, sweetheart. It's freezing. We can't cook. We can't even watch TV. Just come home. We'll figure it out. You're tearing this family apart." Delete. My fingers hesitated over the third message. Devlin's number. I opened it. "Devlin. Dad's throwing things. He's yelling your name over and over. He smashed the microwave. Mom's crying. Please be careful." I swallowed hard. Not because I was scared for myself. I had already braced for the fallout. But because Devlin was still in that collapsing house of glass and splinters. I texted back quickly. "Stay away from him. Stay upstairs. Lock your door if you have to. I'll figure something out." By 7 a.m., the barrage had escalated. Now Victor wasn't just leaving voicemails, he was sending texts. "Victor, you ungrateful piece of trash." Victor, "You owe us for everything we gave you." Victor, "You think you can just walk away? There's a price for betrayal." Lenora followed with her own desperate messages. "Lenora, please come back. We'll fix it. Your father's just upset." "He didn't mean it." I could practically hear her rehearsed sobs through the screen, the same sobs she used whenever she needed something: money, time, a silent scapegoat. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved every voicemail, every text, every scrap of evidence. If they wanted to escalate this into something bigger, I would be ready. By 8 a.m., after the 15th call in under 2 hours, I blocked their numbers. Sitting alone in the soft gray light of Yvette's kitchen, I stared at the black screen of my phone. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I chose freedom, I said aloud, as if saying it could anchor me to the ground. I won't be dragged back into the fire I escaped. There was no going back, no fixing what had been broken beyond recognition. The blood ties that once felt unbreakable now hung loose around my neck, finally cut clean. As my parents scrambled in chaos, I was finally breathing for the first time in years. The early morning haze hung over the small kitchen like a damp curtain. Yvette had already left for work, and I found myself sitting alone, wrapped in one of her oversized sweaters, a cup of lukewarm coffee forgotten beside me. The apartment was quiet, except for the occasional groan of old pipes expanding against the cold. I opened my laptop again, more out of habit than anything else, intending to check emails or scroll mindlessly. Instead, my hand hovered over the folder labeled Documents, Personal. Something pulled me there, an invisible thread tugging at the parts of me still raw and aching. I clicked it open. It was mostly boring paperwork, old insurance forms, scanned receipts, copies of my driver's license and social security card. But as I flipped through the files, one document caught my eye, a credit card statement, dated 3 years ago. My brows furrowed. I didn't recognize the account number. I definitely didn't remember opening a new card around that time. I scrolled through the charges. Grocery stores, gas stations, utility payments, places I knew too well. But it wasn't the list of purchases that made my stomach twist into knots. It was the signature line at the bottom, Lenora Bambolina, my mother's scrawl, sloppy and half-hearted, like she didn't even care if she got caught. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen, hoping, stupidly, that maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was some explanation, some mix-up. But deep down, I knew better. I cross-referenced the statement against my old bank accounts. Month after month, the payments had come out of my checking account automatically. Small amounts at first, barely noticeable. Then larger ones, creeping higher as time passed, bleeding me dry without my even realizing it. Silent theft disguised as familial need. The realization hit harder than anything Victor had screamed at me. Because this wasn't an explosion fueled by whiskey or pride. This was methodical, calculated, a betrayal that stretched back years. I leaned back in the creaky kitchen chair, closing my eyes, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. Flashbacks surfaced like unwanted ghosts. Lenora smiling sweetly when I offered to help with groceries, brushing my hand away and saying, "You're young, Bombolina. You'll make more money. It's just money. We're family after all." Or Victor barking, "It's your duty. Family sticks together." Whenever I hesitated about covering another unpaid bill, it wasn't help they had wanted. It was control, ownership. I opened another document, an old email thread between Lenora and a credit card company. She had written in my name, posing as me, explaining away late payments, forging my voice as easily as she had forged my trust. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a simmering fury I hadn't allowed myself to fully feel until now. This wasn't just selfishness, this was theft, fraud. And it had been happening under my nose while I worked overtime shifts, skipped dinners with friends, missed vacations, all so they could keep the lights on and the Wi-Fi running. I thought about calling her, thought about screaming down the line, demanding to know how she could do this to me. But what would be the point? Lenora would just cry, play the victim, make it about how hard life had been, how much she had sacrificed. She would spin her web like she always did, trapping me again in threads of guilt and obligation. Not this time. Instead, I took screenshots, saved the statements, forwarded every email to a private folder. I was building a file, not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved the protection they had always denied me. Sitting there in the soft morning light, I felt something shift inside me, a hardening, a final severance. This time, I whispered into the empty kitchen, my anger will be a weapon, not a weakness. I wasn't the daughter they could gaslight anymore. I wasn't a piggy bank with a heartbeat. I was done pretending that love meant servitude. As the first hints of sunlight crept through the blinds, I packed the documents carefully into a folder and zipped it into my bag. Proof. Armor. The truth burned in my chest, but soon they would feel the fire too. The sun had barely lifted over the city skyline when my phone vibrated sharply on Yvette's kitchen counter, rattling against my coffee mug. I flinched, heart kicking into a faster rhythm, half expecting another barrage of guilt-drenched texts. But this time it wasn't a call. It was a bank alert. Suspicious login attempt detected. Immediate action recommended. I blinked, reading it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining things. The second notification came fast behind the first, 3 failed login attempts from an unknown device. My pulse spiked. I hadn't shared my banking credentials with anyone. No one but me should even know the password. Unless they guessed. Unless someone desperate enough, someone who thought they still had a claim on my life, decided it was time to take what they felt was owed. Victor. It had to be Victor. I grabbed my laptop and logged into my bank's website directly, double-checking everything. Thankfully, no funds had moved yet. No transactions were pending. But the attempts were real, logged neatly in the activity history like footprints left by an intruder. Without hesitation, I enabled multi-factor authentication, changed every password to a random string of letters and symbols, and called the bank's fraud department. I answered their verification questions mechanically, explaining the situation in calm, clipped words. Yes, I believe a family member tried to access my account without permission. Yes, I would like to freeze any unauthorized access immediately. Yes, I want notifications for everything moving forward. When I finally closed the laptop, my hands were steady, but inside a storm churned. This wasn't just emotional blackmail anymore. This was a full-on attack. They wouldn't take another dime from me. Not now. Not ever. I stood up, stretching my tense shoulders. Yvette's tiny kitchen window framed a slice of the morning, a cold, steel-blue sky dotted with thin clouds. The world outside looked ordinary, almost peaceful, in direct contrast to the war zone my life had become. By noon, a new front had opened. It started with a call from an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another, and another. Curiosity gnawed at me, so I finally listened. How could you abandon your parents on Thanksgiving? A voice, my Aunt Carol's, whined. After everything they've done for you? Shame on you, Bambolina. Another voicemail, this time from Uncle Dennis. They're your parents. They're old. They need you. This isn't how a decent daughter behaves. Text messages flooded in too, from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, friends of the family I barely remembered. Blood is thicker than water. You'll regret this when they're gone. What kind of daughter walks away after all the sacrifices made for her? Sacrifices? What sacrifices? My stomach twisted, not with guilt, but with anger. They had no idea what I had given up. They had no clue about the countless bills I had paid, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering why I was never good enough to be seen as more than a convenience. It was all a show. A carefully curated sob story broadcast to anyone willing to listen. I clenched my fists, breathing through the wave of fury. Instead of responding, I blocked each number methodically. One by one, cutting off the noise like pruning dead branches from a tree I no longer intended to save. But I knew I needed to say something publicly. Something to stop the whispers before they grew into rumors too big to ignore. I opened my social media account, hands steady. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. I simply wrote, Family does not give them the right to bleed you dry. Family does not excuse betrayal. Love without respect is not love. It's ownership. I choose to be free. Then I logged out without waiting for the fallout. I knew they would twist it, spin it into another weapon to use against me. I didn't care anymore. If they were going to paint me as the villain in their tragic little play, so be it. I would rather be the villain in their story than the victim in my own. Later that night, I sat alone in Yvette's living room, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, listening to the quiet hum of the heater. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I allowed myself a small, broken smile. They could rage. They could lie. They could weaponize every ounce of pity they could scrape from the bottom of the barrel. But they couldn't reach me anymore. Every angry call, every manipulative text, every whispered guilt trip only confirmed one thing. I had made the right choice. I was no longer the girl who begged for scraps of affection. I wasn't desperate for crumbs of approval. I wasn't their emotional punching bag or their golden ticket. I was something much more dangerous now. I was free. The more they tried to break me, the stronger I realized I had become. The first rays of dawn hadn't even warmed the frosted sidewalks when a thunderous pounding shook Yvette's front door. I jolted upright from the couch, the blanket sliding to the floor. The knocks came again, harder, faster, followed by the unmistakable bark of Victor's voice. "Bambolina! Open this damn door!" I froze for a heartbeat, my heart hammering against my ribs. Yvette, already moving quickly but quietly, pressed a finger to her lips and reached for her phone. I nodded, edging toward the small peephole. One glance confirmed it. Victor, pacing on the tiny porch, fists clenched, rage practically steaming from his skin. His pickup truck idled noisily behind him, exhaust fumes puffing into the chilly air. "Bambolina!" he shouted again, pounding the wood so hard I worried the flimsy door might give. "You ungrateful little brat! Open up or I swear to God—" I backed away slowly, my breath coming in controlled, deliberate pulls. Yvette spoke quietly into the phone, giving the dispatcher our address and explaining the situation. Her voice stayed calm, measured, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting just feet away. Outside, Victor continued his tirade. "You ruined us. You stole from your own family. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us?" I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. Instead, I sat back down on the couch, pulling the blanket back over my lap, and waited. My silence was louder than any words he could hurl at me. Minutes dragged by in tense silence until flashing red and blue lights painted the walls. A sharp knock, professional, controlled, followed. "Police! Open up!" Yvette opened the door just enough to let the officers in. Two uniformed cops entered, assessing the situation with practiced eyes. Through the still open door, I saw Victor being restrained, his hands waving wildly as he shouted, "She's a thief! She's tearing this family apart!" One officer turned to me. "Ma'am, do you know this man?" I stood up, steady and clear. "Yes, he's my biological father. I have no legal obligation to him. He is here uninvited, making threats." I produced a folder from my bag, containing copies of the restraining warnings I had begun preparing the day after Thanksgiving, anticipating just this moment. The officer took it, scanning quickly. "Understood," he said firmly, turning back to Victor. "Sir, you are trespassing. You need to leave immediately or you will be detained." Victor's face twisted with fury, but seeing the futility, he spat on the ground near the porch and stomped back to his truck. Gravel crunched under his boots. The officers stayed until he drove off, their presence a temporary shield. Once the flashing lights disappeared into the distance, Yvette locked the door, bolting it twice for good measure. I sank back into the couch, my hands still steady, my mind sharp. They would escalate. They already had. But I had escalated too, and I wasn't backing down. That evening, just as I thought the worst of the day was over, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. I debated ignoring it, but instinct nudged me otherwise. Against my better judgment, I answered, pressing the phone cautiously to my ear. "Bambolina." It was Lenora, her voice thin, trembling. "Baby, it's me. I'm so sick. I think it's serious this time. The doctors, they said it could be cancer." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "I don't have much time left," she whimpered. "Please, come home. Let's forget all this, before it's too late." It was the same script, different act. The guilt, the fear, the bait wrapped in maternal despair. I remembered all the nights I had rushed to her side at the slightest complaint, paid bills I couldn't afford, canceled plans, sacrificed dreams, all because of cries just like this. Cries that, more often than not, evaporated into thin air the moment I handed over money or signed paperwork. This time, I stayed quiet for a moment longer, letting the full weight of her manipulation sink in. "If you respected me," I said, voice soft but unwavering, "you wouldn't need lies to bring me back." Her sharp intake of breath told me I had hit the mark. Without another word, I ended the call and immediately blocked the number. I stared at the darkened screen for a long time, feeling the old pain claw at the edges of my resolve, trying to find purchase. But it couldn't. Not anymore. Yvette, sitting across the room, offered a silent nod of support. No pity, no lectures, just understanding. I leaned back, allowing the tiredness to finally catch up with me. Next time they crossed a line, it wouldn't end with just warnings. No more compromising, no more second chances, no more pretending. This was war now, and I intended to win. The time for warnings was over. Now I would strike back without hesitation. The silence that followed that night wasn't comforting. It was dense, heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I drifted into a shallow, restless sleep curled up on Yvette's couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. By mid-morning, I forced myself to get up and take a short walk around the block, just to clear my mind. The December air bit into my skin, but the sharp cold kept me awake. It wasn't until I rounded the corner back to the apartment complex that a strange emptiness struck me. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. My car was gone. For a moment, I thought maybe I had parked somewhere else. Maybe Yvette had needed the space. But no, it had been right there, 2 spots from the dumpster. I felt my stomach clench into a tight knot. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't some random theft. Yanking out my phone, I opened the GPS tracker app I'd installed years ago after an old coworker had warned me about car thefts. My pulse pounded in my ears as the little blue dot blinked, sitting exactly outside my parents' house. I stared at it, disbelief giving way to a cold, burning anger. Without a second thought, I called the local non-emergency police line, requesting a civil standby. If they thought they could steal from me and still pretend to hold the moral high ground, they were about to learn how wrong they were. It took 15 minutes for the officers to meet me at the edge of the street. I explained the situation calmly, handing them my vehicle registration with my name clearly printed. One officer, a tall man with a steady voice, nodded and led the way up the cracked driveway. No one answered the door at first. Victor's pickup sat in the driveway like a guard dog, but the curtains were drawn tight. I knew they were inside. They always hid when they were caught. Finally, after the officers knocked loudly 3 more times, Lenora cracked the door open, peering out with wide, fake innocent eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked sweetly. I stepped forward just enough so she could see me standing beside the officers. "Where's my car, Lenora?" Her face flickered, just for a second, before she plastered on that rehearsed confusion. "Oh, sweetheart, you weren't using it. We thought it was fine." The officer beside me cleared his throat, unimpressed. "Ma'am, the vehicle belongs to her. She has proof. We need to resolve this now." Lenora had no choice. She handed over the keys with shaking fingers, mumbling something about how families are supposed to share. I didn't bother replying. I simply got into my car, noting the smell of cigarette smoke clinging to the seats, Victor's signature stench, and the fast food wrappers tossed carelessly on the passenger side. They had treated my property like trash because they thought they owned me. Not anymore. I drove away without looking back. That evening, just as Yvette and I were sharing takeout on her worn couch, a new insult slid under the apartment door. A crumpled envelope, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in bold font. "Return what you stole from this family, or face the consequences. You think you're free, but blood doesn't break so easily. You will pay." There was no signature, but there didn't need to be. I recognized Victor's heavy-handed style and Lenora's flair for the dramatic all over it. Yvette looked up sharply as I read it aloud. "That's a threat. You should call the cops again." I nodded, but I was already pulling out my phone. Not to call immediately, but to photograph and save the evidence. Then I slid the letter into the same growing file where I kept screenshots, voicemails, and now, proof of theft. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building a case. The next morning, I filed a police report for the theft and harassment. I didn't expect an instant arrest or miraculous justice overnight. But paper trails mattered. Documentation mattered. In a world where the loudest liars often drowned out the truth, I was learning how to speak in a language they couldn't twist. Before lunch, I contacted a local legal aid service and booked an appointment to discuss restraining orders and further action. Sitting across from the intake worker, a kind woman in her 50s who didn't flinch at my story, I laid it all out. Names, dates, Evidence. She nodded grimly. You're doing the right thing, she said. It's going to be a long road, but you're taking the right steps. I left the legal aid office feeling lighter than I had in months, not because the war was over, but because I had finally picked up real weapons. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. It was about justice. They wanted a war? Fine, but they would not like the battlefield I chose. Victory didn't feel like a parade. It felt like waking up to rain battering the windows after a night you thought might kill you, and realizing you were still breathing. I returned to work the next morning with a cautious optimism, determined to rebuild what my family had tried to destroy. I wore my calm like armor, ready to move forward without fear. But before I even finished my first cup of coffee at my desk, the whispers started. It began with glances, co-workers pulling each other aside, exchanging quick, concerned looks. One of them, a woman from accounting who used to chat with me over lunch, avoided my gaze entirely. At first I told myself I was imagining it. Until another coworker, Steve, from IT, accidentally left a printed email on the shared printer tray. It was a forwarded message, unsigned but dripping with venom. Be cautious around Bambolina. Rumor has it she's under investigation for financial misconduct. Stole from her own parents. If she could betray her family, imagine what she might do here. The paper shook in my hands. My throat went dry. It wasn't just some office gossip. It was coordinated, crafted, launched like a missile straight at my credibility. And I knew exactly who had fired it. Victor. The style was unmistakable. Half-truths stretched into ugly caricatures, carefully seeded to inflict maximum doubt and isolation. He had always believed that the loudest story won, and if he couldn't control me, he would make sure no one else trusted me either. Before I could even process the first blow, another one hit. My direct manager, Mr. Andrews, called me into his office. His face was tight, professional, but not unfriendly. Close the door, he said. I obeyed, heart hammering against my ribs. He folded his hands on the desk. We received an anonymous complaint this morning. Allegations of elder abuse and financial exploitation. They didn't provide evidence, just accusations. I inhaled sharply but kept my face composed. And you believe it? He leaned back, studying me. I believe there's always two sides to a story. That's why I'm talking to you first. Thank God for small mercies. I reached into my bag, my hands steady, and pulled out the thick folder I'd been compiling over the past few weeks. Screenshots of threatening texts, saved voicemails, the theft report, proof of every payment made under coercion. I slid it across the desk without a word. He raised his eyebrows slightly but didn't interrupt. Page by page, he flipped through the evidence. I sat in silence, giving him space to absorb it all. When he finished, he closed the folder gently. You don't owe me an explanation, he said finally. But if you'd like to say something for the record. I met his eyes without flinching. I won't be judged by people who only know half the story. I did what I had to survive. I protected myself the way no one else ever did, and I refuse to apologize for that. He nodded slowly. Understood. There was a beat of silence. Then he added, voice low but firm, You're not the first person to survive something like this. And you won't be the last. Relief, raw and staggering, threatened to break through my carefully constructed wall. But I kept it together, just barely. I left his office with my head high. Still, the damage Victor and Lenora tried to inflict couldn't be completely erased. Some co-workers remained wary, some drifted away entirely. And that was fine. Let them go. Better to lose fair-weather friends than keep people around who needed no more than a whisper to turn on me. Later that evening, Yvette and I sat together in her tiny living room, unwinding after our respective workdays. She cracked open a soda and passed it to me without a word. No pep talks, no pity, just quiet solidarity. Anything new from the circus? She asked lightly. I shook my head, feeling a grim kind of satisfaction. They're getting desperate. Because that's what desperation looked like. Smearing, lying, clawing at someone else's life when your own was crumbling. It wasn't strength. It was the frantic thrashing of people who had already lost. As I stared out the window into the deepening dusk, I realized something profound. Their attacks didn't break me. They exposed them. And now, with my career intact, my reputation defended, and my boundaries unshakable, it was time to end this once and for all. Not with anger, not with screaming, but with cold, deliberate action. Their attacks only exposed their desperation. It was time to end this, legally and forever. The next blow didn't come as a surprise. It came in the form of a thick, cream-colored envelope tucked between the usual junk mail at Yvette's place. No return address, no handwriting, just my name typed neatly across the front like a loaded gun aimed straight at my chest. I opened it cautiously, my stomach coiling into tight knots. Inside was a formal letter, one that looked official enough to make my heart stutter before I even registered the words. Victor was threatening to sue me. The claims were outrageous. Emotional distress, theft of familial resources, elder abuse. Attached was a ludicrously fabricated list of supposed debts, charges for groceries I had bought, bills I had paid, gifts I had given willingly but were now twisted into loans I had stolen. At the bottom, a bold statement. Failure to repay the full amount plus emotional damages within 30 days will result in formal legal action. I let the papers fall onto the kitchen table, laughing under my breath. A dry, bitter sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. They were really doing it. They were trying to weaponize the law the same way they had weaponized family, guilt, loyalty. But not this time. This time, I was ready. I called the lawyer I had met at Legal Aid 2 weeks earlier. Within hours, we had a plan. Evidence was key, so I spent the next 2 nights compiling everything meticulously. The threatening voicemails and texts, the incident report I had filed for the theft, screenshots of social media harassment, bank statements showing unauthorized activity, witness statements, including Yvette's, verifying harassment and stalking. By the time we finished, my case wasn't just strong, it was airtight. When the day of the hearing came, I walked into the courthouse wearing the same black blazer I had worn to every job interview, every major life event where I needed to project strength I sometimes didn't feel. Today, the strength was real. Victor was already there, sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom, arms crossed over his chest like a sulking child. He didn't even look at me as I passed. Lenora was conspicuously absent. Whether out of shame or self-preservation, she had abandoned him to fight alone. I stepped into the courtroom with my lawyer by my side and didn't look back. The hearing itself felt surreal. Victor's lawyer, some slick local guy with an overconfident smile, tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter who had taken advantage of her elderly, struggling parents. But when my lawyer laid out the evidence, documents, recordings, police reports, the smugness drained from their faces. Victor tried to object, tried to sputter some emotional appeal about family values and disrespect, but the judge wasn't buying it. When it was my turn to speak, I stood without trembling. I looked the judge in the eye and said clearly, "Love isn't loyalty when it demands your destruction." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. In the end, the judge granted me a full restraining order. No contact, no harassment, no attempts at communication, direct or indirect. Victor was fined for harassment and malicious litigation. His fabricated claims were dismissed with prejudice, meaning he couldn't file them again. I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I had felt in years. Not victorious in the way movies portray it. There was no cheering, no confetti raining down, but victorious in the way that mattered. I was free. Truly free. As I crossed the courthouse parking lot, the sky overhead cracked open with a sudden downpour. I didn't run for cover. I let the rain soak through my clothes, wash over me, rinse off years of guilt and betrayal and lies. Freedom wasn't neat or tidy or easy. It was messy. It was uncomfortable. It was terrifying. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, no one else owned my future. Freedom wasn't given to me. I fought for it. And now, I would learn how to live it. The rain had finally stopped by the time I reached home. Or rather, the place that was slowly, surely becoming home. It wasn't grand. A second-floor walk-up with creaky stairs and a finicky heater. The furniture was mismatched. The curtains were hand-me-downs from Yvette, and the tiny balcony faced a cracked alleyway lined with battered trash cans. But it was mine. Every scuff on the floor, every chipped mug in the cupboard, every faded book stacked on the windowsill, all of it chosen, cleaned, or placed by my own hands. There was no shouting here, no veiled threats hidden behind smiles, no manipulation creeping like smoke through the walls. For the first time in my life, silence didn't mean danger. It meant peace. I started to settle into a new rhythm, slow, cautious, but real. Early mornings sipping lukewarm coffee on the balcony, evenings filling out job applications for promotions, studying online courses Yvette had suggested. On weekends, I'd wander the local farmer's market, picking out cheap vegetables and secondhand novels, breathing in the quiet hum of a life finally unhooked from survival mode. It was during one of these weekends, sorting through a box of worn mystery paperbacks at a sidewalk sale, that I got the news. A distant cousin, someone I barely spoke to, messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, heard about your folks. Real shame. Hope you're doing okay." Confused, I messaged back carefully, prying without looking too interested. What came back made my stomach twist, not with fear this time, but a grim, detached pity. Lenora's terminal illness? Fabricated. A sympathy stunt to gather support, but it had backfired. Badly. Once the truth leaked, Victor and Lenora became pariahs, evicted from their rental after failing to pay bills, cut off by the extended family. No friends left to peddle their sob stories to. Just two aging grifters stewing in the ruins of the empire they built on manipulation. There was no glee in the knowledge, no satisfaction, only a hollow, bittersweet ache. They had spent their lives hollowing out the people around them. Now, they were the empty ones. I closed my phone slowly, staring out at the busy street. It was over. Not with fireworks, not with apologies, but with silence, the kind that spoke louder than any scream ever could. Weeks passed. I didn't seek updates. I didn't stalk their social media or pry through gossip. I had a life to build. One evening, as spring began to thaw the edges of winter, my phone buzzed. Devlin. The name lit up my screen like a small flare in the dark. I answered on the second ring, my heart tight in my chest. "Hey," he said, voice rough, uncertain. "Can I come stay with you?" He didn't have to explain. He didn't owe me a speech. I could hear everything in the way his voice cracked just slightly. The exhaustion, the betrayal, the desperate hope. "I packed a bag," he added. "I don't want to be like them." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "I'll come get you," I said simply. By the time I pulled up outside the shabby house, the house that had once been my own prison, Devlin was already waiting on the curb, a battered backpack slung over one shoulder, shoulders squared, jaw set. He climbed into my car without a word, and we didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, I helped him enroll in a local community college. We found him a dorm room with a roommate who didn't ask too many questions. I taught him how to set up a checking account, how to apply for scholarships, how to read a lease before signing anything. One night, after a marathon of cheap pizza and late-night paperwork, he looked at me across the tiny kitchen table and said, "You showed me it's okay to walk away from people who only know how to hurt." I didn't say anything at first. I just nodded, swallowing around the lump in my throat. Because I needed to hear it too. Freedom wasn't about the absence of pain. It was about the presence of choice. A few months later, we sat on a bench at the edge of a local park, watching kids kick around a battered soccer ball under the pink swell of a setting sun. Devlin laughed at something on his phone, a deep, genuine laugh that crinkled his whole face. I hadn't heard him laugh like that since we were kids, before life taught us to tiptoe around landmines disguised as parents. I leaned back, letting the last golden rays warm my face. Healing wasn't clean. It wasn't a straight line. It was messy, jagged, stitched together with scar tissue and stubborn hope. Some days still hurt. Some nights still woke me gasping from nightmares I couldn't quite shake. But they were fewer now. The house I left behind, the people I left behind, were never a home. They were a cage. What I was building now with my own hands, one clumsy brick at a time, that was a home. It wasn't perfect. It didn't have to be. It was real. It was mine. And finally, I was free to live it. If there's one thing my journey taught me, it's this. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, by kindness, by the freedom to be yourself without fear. I spent years believing that love meant sacrifice, that being a good daughter meant losing myself piece by piece. But the truth is, love without respect isn't love at all. You don't owe your soul to anyone just because they share your last name. Freedom isn't easy. It's messy, it's painful, but it's worth every step. If you're standing at the edge of a hard decision, if you're carrying the weight of people who only know how to hurt, please hear me when I say, you are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not cruel for protecting your heart. You deserve a life that feels like yours. And if no one has told you today, I'm proud of you. You are stronger than you think. You are allowed to outgrow the people who refuse to grow with you. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic relationship, even if it hurt? What was the hardest part? Or if you're still in that place, what would freedom look like for you? Tell me in the comments. If this story touched your heart, type 1 inch in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And if you didn't love it, that's okay too. Tell me why. I'd love to hear your honest thoughts. Let's build a community where stories heal, not hurt. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you want more real, raw stories like this. Stories that remind you, you are never alone. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.